that's that item. So we now go to the final part of the meeting, which is to do with Auckland Transport. I asked the Auckland Transport team to come up. We have a Q3 performance report and the Auckland Transport update. In fact, Claire will lead off the first part, but as we've done in the past, we'll combine the two to expedite things. Over to you, Claire.
Hi, thank you again. Look, this report is to receive Auckland Transport's Q3 performance report for the period from the 1st of January to the 31st of March. You should have received yesterday an update from Auckland Transport that included a table correcting some inaccuracies in the performance report. The key movement in that respect is with regard to the freight level of service metric, which was previously reported as not meeting the target, and that's been corrected to being within the target range now, so it is online. That therefore changes the targets from there are 13 targets that now have not been met and 12 that are on track and 6 that are yet to be reported on. The AT performance report notes the impacts of the January storm events and the damage to the Auckland Transport network, which is ongoing in parts. Their capital expenditure is tracking at 95% of planned spend, and AT do note that any reforecast underspend will need to be reallocated to flood response areas. While the total operating revenue is favourable to budget due to funding from Waka Kotahi, their parking and revenue enforcement continues to be below target. I think the other key point to note is that the majority of their programs are on track, but changes to and as a response from the LOE mean that the Connected Community program is being revisited, and this is having an impact on some of their performance measures. I think, as the Chair has said, as ATR in attendance to provide the monthly update, it is appropriate to ask any questions of them in the next section after you've heard the latest monthly update. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. I think, yes, that's our sort of process that we've adopted. So I'm happy to move the recommendation in order to get the AT team up here to answer people's questions. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by the Mayor Brown. All those in favour? Against? Okay, thank you everyone, and we will then call the AT team up to the table. And we have both Marks, Mark Lang, Mark Lambert, and Stacey. Welcome, folks, and over to you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon, Chair Watson, Deputy Chair Fletcher, and Mayor Brown, and other members of the elected members. I'm Mark Lang. I'm acting for Dean until he gets back on Tuesday, obviously joined by Stacey and Mark. We're going to run through this presentation reasonably quickly today, but I would just like to start with a few opening comments. That it's been really valuable to hear the SOI conversation. And one of the things you'll see in our presentation today is, whilst the SOI is still draft, we're not waiting to start implementing some of the things that are in it. So we're going to give you specific updates on temporary traffic management, dynamic lanes and the bus transponders, and also some of the performance around recent weather events and how public transport's going. Again, touching on the SOI conversation, so another two things that we are specifically working on that were just discussed is the parking fees. We are targeting 1 July for potential changes, and also reviewing those road corridor access charges again. So for temporary traffic management, potentially from 1 July. So again, we're wanting to start the year on the front foot, not waiting until this document's finalised. I would like to flag the other key thing that we're doing at the moment is obviously we're in the middle of a change proposal, and one of the key pieces of work we need to do around the SOI still, and to the point around delivery and milestones, is ensure that we take into account both the fiscal and people constraints that we will be facing in the next 12 months, and it probably touches on partly what Councillor Newman was raising, that we just need to make sure that the SOI is absolutely robust and that what we put in there is things that we commit to delivering. Is probably, in some of the language we're starting to use internally, is doing less but doing it better. So that's definitely a key focus for us as an organisation. If I just jump through to the... Yeah, please, thanks, Stacey. So this slide obviously sets out some of the recent highlights. Obviously, and we'll touch on this in a minute, the ongoing bus driver shortage. And obviously, you can see the trends that are tracking. Obviously, there's been government announcements today that those have caught up on around the budget, around potentially helping with issues around driver wages, etc. So obviously, there's been some good engagement, and obviously there's a lot of key work to still do in this space. Completion of the physical works on Matakana Link Road, awarding of the third build contract for the fourth new ferry, so this is the next aluminium hybrid boat. Further bus transponder rollout, decision by Dean to appoint, and that's obviously out there at the moment for expressions of interest, but an Executive General Manager of Public Transport. So absolutely taking on board that feedback that we need to dial down our focus specifically on public transport. And then obviously working together program across council, families, water care, Kaingaroa, etc. So good collaboration across local and central government agencies. Challenges, not surprisingly, relate to rail network outages, weather events, obviously ongoing customer satisfaction around public transport, and obviously more recently the ferry issues this week. So again, most of the issues are related to weather and public transport issues. So if we just start diving into some of these direct points that we just discussed around the draft statement of intent, so temporary traffic management, we have been updating our website and introducing some new capability. I'd call this a bit of a soft launch at the moment, just to check that we've got the systems in place, but actually putting in place a button you can click on that says report a problem, report surplus road cones out on the network, and then putting in place systems so that those cones go and get picked up. And you can see the chart on the bottom right, just the number of new abandoned road cone forms coming through. So once we are confident that we have the systems in place behind this for picking up that street furniture, we'll go far more above the line with it as an activity. Just jump to the next one. So the dynamic laning, obviously another key area of focus around the letter of expectation. So we have gone through and identified 180 potential locations. These have been down selected to 22 potential opportunities, and 7 are progressing at the moment to modelling. And we don't have a prioritised list at this stage, but we're working through based on a series of ways of considering these, what might be the best candidate sites to proceed with. Likewise with the bus transponders, some pleasing work in this space, particularly as you can see here, the 2 phases of a trial, Manukau Par Road and also down Dominion Road, the 10 stops, intersections through that. And obviously we're going to target Eastern Busway as well, so again making some progress in advance of the statement of intent being finalised. Performance metrics, apologies for the error in the previous quarterly report, it was just a calibration issue between the 2 reports, and we will dig into some more of these as we dig into the rest of this presentation. But obviously public transport boardings continue to grow, and that's the annualised historic number as we start to lap some of those lower months from a year ago. And some positive trends obviously on the left-hand column, but again, obviously, the major concern on this page is really around DSI, which Stacey's going to talk more about. And so deaths and serious injuries continue to be, I guess, one of our key areas of concern.
Thanks, Mark. So I'll just give a quick update of progress against public transport metrics. So overall, we continue to see growth in public transport year on year. At the moment, as Mark's just mentioned, we are at 65.6 million boardings for the last 12 months as a rolling average. We're currently forecasting 68 million by the end of June for this financial year, which is above the 59 million SOI target. And despite patronage having gone down in the last few weeks, particularly as a result of service impacts and weather, operating at the moment around 70% pre-COVID levels, we are still targeting 80% run rate effectively by the end of this financial year, by the end of June, to give us a good start for next year. If we're starting at around 80%, we would hope by the end of that year to be achieving 100% of pre-COVID patronage levels. In terms of our performance against other cities, the top left graph shows the patronage recovery in Auckland, red, as we show each month, against that in Christchurch and Wellington. As I've just mentioned, in the last few weeks, we have seen a downturn in the rate of patronage against pre-COVID levels, down to around 70%. So we have seen a bit of a downturn because of service levels and weather, but we are targeting still for that 80% pre-COVID level by the end of this financial year. The graph on the bottom left is our reliability of bus services, again relative to Christchurch and Wellington, and shows that we are making some headway in that space, albeit not as quick as we would like, as we're getting returned to driver levels that we would expect to see. So the bus driver shortfall at the moment, it has decreased to 297 overall, which is a decrease from around 550, I think, before Christmas. North Shore is still disproportionately being impacted particularly from the Riches Albany depot, but having spoken to their chief executive just last night, some relatively good news. We've got 18 drivers who are ready to join, trained in the next 2 weeks, and that should take some significant pressure off, in particular the NX1 service, which we've asked them to prioritise. We're also expecting to see the reinstatement of the 50B service on Waiheke Island as from 1 July, because they now have sufficient drivers which they're just completing the training on to restore their service levels. Ferry crew shortage remains at around 35. However, the good news is that the recent announcements by the Minister to improve the immigration settings again allows Fullers to progress offshore recruitment for those vacancies. Just our usual slide looking at the arterial road network performance. As we'd expect to see, March continued the lower service levels as we saw in February. Given the concept of March Madness, they are typically our worst months of the year. During March, the data shows that 70% of the arterial network operated at good or acceptable levels of service relative to congestion, and that is against a 12-month rolling average of around 77% of the network. To put that into perspective, obviously the morning peak is typically the worst, and there was a 63% service level across the network in the morning peak. Put that into context, that means broadly that our AM peak average speed was 39 kilometres per hour across the network. Thanks, Stacey. And just a quick update on where we're at with the weather recovery across the road network. Last week we opened Piha Road, open to the public. The 9th of May storm event did create a number of slips across the network, with a major slip at Caton Road in Waitakere, which has resulted in a new road closure, unfortunately, but access is available to all residents. Across the network, we're now down to 10 road closures, with residents able to access either side of that closure. And remedial works and design and investigation has commenced on all slips across the network. There are currently 320 and 130 bridge or culvert scour sites as well, which we're working on. We are just finalising, as part of the forward capital programme, our budgets around this, and at the moment the recovery cost estimate over 2 to 3 years is looking in the order of 300 to 400 million, which we will be building into the capital programme. Over to you, Mark.
It's me. Kia ora. So far, we've had 633 deaths and serious injuries reported on Tamaki Makaurau roads over the last 12 months, and that's from May 22 to April 2023. And that is 49 people who have lost their lives on our roads, and 584 that have been seriously injured. 189 DSI have occurred on Tamaki Makaurau roads year to date, so that's from January to the end of April. And obviously that's far too many. Point to note on that, however, is we have seen a 21% decline in fatalities during that time frame when you compare that to the same time frame in 2022, where nationally fatalities have declined also 7% compared to the same time last year. Drivers and motorcyclists obviously remain the largest group harmed on our roads as well in terms of that. So that's 39% and 21% of the DSI for those categories. In terms of vulnerable road users, they make up 44% of those numbers in terms of those DSI numbers, and that's 21% on motorcycle, 16% on pedestrian, and 7% in terms of cyclists. So just a reminder, in terms of kilometres travelled, obviously that is a huge disparity in equity in terms of modal choice and harm across our network. So if we go to the next slide, we've got that local board view that we presented last time. And in terms of that, some of those metrics that we talked about look very similar to last time. So we still have over half of the DSI occurring within 6 local board areas. And they are Rodney, Franklin, Manurewa, Henderson, Massey, Otara, Papatoe and Howick. And we have 43% of injuries for pedestrians and cyclists occurring within 5 local board areas, and they are Otara, Papatoe, Manurewa, Waitemata, Howick and Devonport and Takapuna. So one question that did come up last time that I thought I'd include in here was, what is the percentage split between sealed and unsealed roads? So we did put that up there this month to show that view. So 98% of DSI does occur on sealed roads. Only 2% have occurred in terms of roads that are unsealed, or what they call end of road. So where it goes from a sealed road into an unsealed road over the last year. And none of those were fatalities, but in terms of that, it does provide you that perspective when we have those conversations about sealed versus unsealed.
Thanks, Stacey. In terms of our capital program, what we've actually done, I don't know if councillors have seen it yet, but we've asked for a confidential workshop 24th next week by the Transport Infrastructure Committee to actually give you an update on just how we're tracking with the capital program, and particularly the plans for, I guess, the next 1 to 2 years and some of the challenges. We just think it warrants probably a separate workshop to do that. In terms of how we're tracking year to date, we've spent 95% of the budget. Within that, the funding mix is pretty close to 50-50 between central and local government. It says CIP there, 1%, it's Crown Infrastructure Partners continuing to contribute to some of the projects. So a good mix of funding. Obviously, the recent storm events have increased some delivery risks, and obviously there's some emerging funding challenges over the next 3 to 4 years. I would call out within the existing program this year, whilst we've spent 95% of the budget, there has been a change in mix a little bit towards more money on the likes of renewals, and some of the key corridor improvement projects have been slowed down in line with the letter of expectation when we're looking to start looking at the affordability of some of those projects, as some of them are being re-reviewed. But we can pick that up next week. In terms of highlights, new electric trains milestones, so the new EMUs are on track, and obviously one of the next key projects for us is getting the new stabling at Wiri kicked off. Obviously we talked about the ferry contract being awarded, and 5.74 kilometres of safe cycling facilities added or upgraded, along with 5 high-risk intersections. And we have secured Waka Kotahi funding for the ferry upgrade. What we will be doing, obviously, and it was touched on before, but in the next week, is digesting the government budget announcement today and just see how that starts to roll through into both this year and next particularly around the flood response or storm response. Just jump to the next one, please. Thanks, Stacey. In terms of operating financial performance, the very short version here is that we think we will come within budget this year, despite all of the challenges we've been facing. Again, that's largely as a result of us starting to do, I guess, what I call significant cost reduction in the last few months, and the way it's playing out through the next few months of the year. We've also been obviously receiving additional funding from central government around the discounted fares, and which has helped actually with our PT recovery, etc., and obviously funding around the immediate flood response, which is now confirmed at a 91% contribution from central government. So on the operating side at the moment, we're actually, I guess, the key focus is getting ourselves onto a trajectory in line with the draft budget that obviously still needs to be finalised. But as we've talked about in some of the budget workshops, we think we have a line of sight to how we get there. So looking ahead, obviously key highlights, key focus on public transport. Dean's back next week, and obviously focusing on doubling down our focus on public transport with the appointment of a dedicated exec role. Finalisation of the statement of intent and making sure it's aligned to the budget critically. K-Road consultation and receiving the draft GPS from government was one of the key things that we want to actively input into when that comes out, particularly as it looks towards the balance of investments into the next LTP period. Key challenges, obviously customer satisfaction across the transport network. I mean, we're all aware of the issues, but it is the key issue at the moment that's fronting us. Completing our change process internally, that's we're right in the middle of consultation still, but that will be getting confirmed early next week. And obviously will have a significant impact on people within Auckland Transport. And then just, again, off the back of today's announcements, working with Waka Kotahi to make sure we've got good line of sight into available funding as we head into next year, because again, half of our money effectively comes from central government. But that's a wrap on the presentation, so obviously happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Mark, Stacey, thanks very much. We've got some questions there for you from Councillors Ferry, Henderson and Simpson, and Mayor Brown.
Thank you. So I've got 3 questions. The first is around the looking at car parking fee increases, potentially coming into effect on the 1st of July, which I think is what I heard. What will the increased revenue be spent on?
At the moment, we've got about a $30 million hole in our parking revenues, and so that's effectively plugging a hole in the budget. So that's necessary to help us deliver on the 370 odd million hole in the council budget.
Okay. I just think that might be worth our consideration in our discussions. When are you likely to finalise what that will look like in terms of the finances? If they're coming into effect on the 1st of July?
We're working through that internally in the next 4 weeks. I'll need to check with the team exactly when it gets firmed up. Okay. But just to be clear, yeah, we're reliant on that increase to actually help us deliver on our budget.
Then the next one, the road cones, I think you've referred to them as abandoned road cones. That's great, and I have a constituent who gets really hot under the collar about those, but also other forms of what's kind of quasi-illegal dumping in the transport space. So, signs that are left over from construction that are never picked up. To a certain extent, some of the micro-mobility devices that are left in the road corridor as well. Is that going to be, are people going to be able to use that tool to report those as well? Because I think that would be useful.
We've actually got Tracy Buchan here from our team. Might get her to come and join us if that's right. She's leading that piece of work.
Sure. Thank you. And also, just while you're getting your seat, are you connecting up with the waste team within council proper?
Yes, you can actually report anything on that in that abandoned cone place, and I would encourage anybody, certainly signs, they are also road furniture we're interested in collecting, but anything like that, it gets cycled back through our customer a CRM system to the right people. So yes, I would encourage that. You can take a photograph as well and upload it onto there and drop a pin on a map. So
Right.
it's a good advance on that. The second question was about, sorry, scooters.
Or the micromobility. So, I mean, I guess the question is really, so you've said, someone will go out and pick it up. Is that us as in the council family going out and picking it up, and then what happens to it if it belongs to somebody else? Like, a lot of the road cones actually don't belong to us.
No, none of them belong to us.
Yeah.
We've got 8 of our tier 1 roading contractors and TTM companies that pick it up without charging, and they repatriate anything that's branded back to its owner. But also Fulton Hogan have got a scheme where they're actually munching down the ones that aren't branded and making playground furniture and matting.
Cool.
So it's quite a good news story in that respect. But cones are quite expensive, and the proliferation of them on the network they make them quite a hot commodity for the people that pick them up.
Great. I'd love some more information about this, but I won't hog the time. That's fantastic. If we could get a bit more info, that would be fantastic. They're really good, and I think there is a comms opportunity there too, Mr. Mayor. My last one is to return to my least favourite topic with AT, which is the bus driver shortage. Previously I asked and was told that we were probably on track for the shortage to be resolved in about September. I wanted to know if there's any progress on that. And also specifically, you mentioned the 50B is going to be reinstated on Waiheke. That's great news. But are there other routes that are going to be reinstated prior to the full complement, and in particular the 27T? It's my favourite. Used to be my least favourite bus route, now it's my favourite. It doesn't exist at the moment.
I think I'll have to come back to you specifically on the 2017, but I will. So we're engaging with all operators on a very regular basis with regards to their recruitment plans and recruitment pipeline at this point. And we had confirmation earlier in this week from all operators. We are confident still of September to get back to the complement required to, subject to funding, to be able to operate our scheduled bus services. I will come back to you on the 2070, like I say, and I did mention that, for example, for North Shore, we are focused on making sure NX1, for example, and the Northern Express services are prioritised through those depots as well. And I know I should have answered it during the presentation, but you did ask a question of KiwiRail around the rail network rebuild. For people with disabilities, there is a dedicated site on our website, and they can call the contact centre if they're unable to use bus rail replacements, and they can get a free mobility service provided for them, and that can be done in advance as well. With regards to cyclists, we haven't specifically provided alternative services. That's difficult with buses, but we at each stage we are looking at whether we can do pop-up cycle lanes and just facilitate improved, at least temporary, infrastructure as well.
Thanks, Mark. I would just say my question was kind of more about how are you engaging with those groups to check whether what we're providing is actually meeting their needs. But I appreciate you might need to come back on that.
No, we have a dedicated group called the Public Transport Advisory Group, which we meet on a monthly basis, I think, and we've engaged with them on that particular solution, and we're checking in with them how it's going for their members as well. We obviously do engage with cycling groups as well on an ongoing basis.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Henderson.
Thanks. 2 questions, both on death and serious injury. So taking out the rural areas, it just doesn't seem to be any reason why there's such a huge discrepancy between local board areas. I mean, I wouldn't think Henderson Massey is particularly a place where you can go very fast, especially in traffic. So why is there such a discrepancy? Why are some of the poorer areas of our city, why do they have the most amount of deaths and serious injuries?
Thank you for that question. It's a really good question, to be fair, in terms of that. Why? I think there's multiple factors at play with that, and a lot of it does have to do with equity of access as well, which is something obviously we need to have a broader conversation about. So in terms of, investment in different modes and making sure they're accessible to all. But also it does have, when you sort of drill down into some of what are the causal factors, you will see that there might be absence of warranted fitness, star rating of vehicles that come into it. And so some of those factors do play out into terms of what you see in social demographics across the region that add to the numbers.
So just to follow up, and then I've got another one. Thank you, Chair. So bouncing off that answer, would it then be fair to say that there is an inequity in terms of the investment that poorer areas get as opposed to wealthier areas in terms of different modes?
Another really good question. Not necessarily. In terms of that, as I said, I think there's different things at play in terms of that, and it is, the access around what people have and means in terms of travel. And so you go back to that scenario, will you get in your car without a warrant and actually it being decently roadworthy if you have to get to your job to feed your children, right? And that's a really good sort of case scenario to think about. Someone's always going to do that. If they have to, in order to be able to make ends meet. So there's broader conversations around that, but yes, in terms of when we look at our public transport network and how it's structured, are we meeting the needs of some communities? No, I think we've said that before in terms of that and how we actually work with communities to provide solutions that meet their needs. A lot of shift workers, as an example, in terms of that, bus timetables may not be fit for purpose within the area. So that's something that we're learning about and trying to improve upon.
Interesting. Thanks for that work. That's really, really interesting. I'd like to know more, and I'll keep following it up as we go. My last question. Thank you, Chair. I'm really concerned at looking at the discrepancy here with 7% cyclists in road user type being death and serious injury. Can I just kind of put that number in context? What's the normal mode share of cycling?
Gosh, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's tiny. It's like less than 1% when you actually sort of break it down. What I can do is we do publish an equity analysis in terms of modal use each year. So there was one that was done in December. I will forward that to the chair of the committee to share because it is insightful because it sort of goes into the equity factors. It's all about the equity factors with mode share and in terms of road harm.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thanks, Chair.
Mayor Brown?
Good report, thanks. I'm very pleased about things like the dynamic lanes. Can we know, I've got questions about those. I don't know which the 7 are that have progressed to modelling and quite what the modelling means. Can we get a picture at some stage of what you think a model looks like? And what does modelling mean? I don't know, is that just numbers?
We can actually provide a list of the 7.
I'd like a little bit more information if you send me that. What does it mean? But good on you for getting underway. Very good indeed. And then on the DSI stuff, I know that when those sort of questions popped up when I was involved in the LTSA. Drivers and motorcyclists represent 39 and 21. In order to get some change, you've got to really highlight where the real risks are. It says 21% of them are on motorcycles, and yet nowhere near like 21% of the people driving are on the roads are on motorcycles. So you have to, I know that with a big saving of lives during my period in LTSA was, in fact, we talked people out of going on motorbikes. And there was a sudden rush of silly old men, which a lot of my mates were, when they get to 50, they all go and buy a Harley Davidson, and they remember when we all had 250 BSAs when we were young, and they get on a 1200cc thing, and there's a sudden massive spike of 45 to 60-year-old males falling off motorbikes. And so I'd like you to present information that makes sense on that. 21% of them are on motorbikes, but as a percentage of what's on the road, it's really out of proportion. And so if you could get something that shows that out, and it's a bit like also what Councillor Henderson asked about cycleways, as a percentage on the road, are they over-representing? And I think that tells you who's in danger. And then similarly, it's good that you're moving towards things like the road surface type. It looks as you get the idea here, it's actually safer to drive on an unsealed road, but I'm sure that's not the case. Well, again, you have to say, because 98% of accidents occurred on sealed roads, 98% of our, what percentage of our vehicles are travelling on sealed roads, which is probably 98%. It might even be 99%. So I'm not, you know, if I look at that now, I think I should only drive on an unsealed road, but I can tell you this, from up north, as a percentage of the people, your percentage of people driving on it have a much higher chance of crapping out if they're on an unsealed road. So somehow or other, it's good that you got that, but it needs to be put in some sort of context, because people need to learn that you should be more careful on an unsealed road, unless I've got it wrong that it accidentally turns out to be safer. But I find that very hard to believe. So can we do something or other so that when we read these, just instead of reporting, so that a group of old councillors here can be fed information, I'd like to have it so that it stands out like dog's balls. It's not a good idea to ride a motorbike. It's not particularly clever to think it's safer to drive on a loose metal road, because my experience of that is that it's not. Right, there you are. Thank you for that. I'll shut up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colourful metaphors. And
Excuse me, sorry, through the chair, I just have an answer on the 7 dynamic lane sites. So the 7 sites are in no order of preference: Harris Road, Waipuna Road, Smales Road, Sylvia Park Road, Accent Drive, East Coast Road and Dairy Flat Highway. And these are being evaluated to confirm the benefits, impacts and priority. So that modelling will look at the benefits, impacts and priority of making those dynamic lanes.
Okay. I think I did see that one, but I was looking to see whether the Dominion Road's been rolled out with the cones. I want to have a crack at one of the big feeder roads like Dominion Road. That's really important, that you're having got 10 of them all connected up. The main thing really, I know those are good, but to have a real difference to how Auckland works, we've got to get them on the main roads. And Dominion Road, if you've got 10 of them now, let's have a crack at that, particularly given the fact that the government are thinking of pouring several $1 billion into Dominion Road on an untried thing. It'd be nice to see what improvement I could get with some buses. But I commend you for your efforts to get underway, and you will be suitably rewarded or castigated depending on bloody progress.
okay, Councillor Lee.
Just a point of information, going back to the performance metrics slide. I noticed all the metrics in column 1 are given in percentages except for PT boardings. Now, PT is a major concern for us in terms of, especially in terms of the amount of budget, OPEX and CAPEX we put in to PT, and we heard in the previous item regarding the SOI, the aspiration to get back to and exceed pre-COVID-19 patronage levels. Now, 3.5 years on, well, not quite 3.5 years on, but more than 3 years on, the 65.6 million needs to be factored against the peak, the pre-COVID peak in December 2019, which was 103,167,517 passenger trips per year. That makes 63%. Now, we often hear 80, 85% coming from 80 sources, but it's important that we don't get complacent about this. We're still well behind the 8 ball. We're putting a hell of a lot of money into this, and it's costing our community dearly, and we need to focus and be aware that we have a long way to go. So the percentage in there should be 63% or slightly over 63%. Thank you.
Okay, no.
Absolutely agree to the sentiment. Obviously, when we talk about the 63%, that is based on historic actuals. So that if you take the last 12 months patronage compared to the 103 million, if we take, and depends on the week that we're picking at the moment, what we're trying to do is take a normalised week and annualise it. It's giving us a range that's over 70% at the moment, but there's a long way to go to get back from 70 million packs to 100 million packs. And the principal thing there that you're actually competing with is working from home is actually the biggest competitor to public transport in some ways. So to get back to 100 million actually means probably in old terms we've got to be doing equivalent to 130, because just the change in work patterns on Mondays and Fridays and other weekdays, etc. So we know it's a big aspiration, but it's if we're to galvanise ourselves around one thing as an organisation at the moment, it's probably the right thing to focus on.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And not just Mondays and Fridays, Thursdays. Have a look at the screen there. Okay, final questions, councillors Darby, Walker, Hills and Baker. And we do have a number of people that have to be away before 4, so I would appreciate some conciseness in the questions at this time in proceedings. Councillor Darby?
Yeah, thanks. Mark, not so much pertaining to this last quarter, but looking ahead, government's announcement today in the budget of fare free PT for under 13s, which was of course this council started that, at least on the weekends, some 5 years ago. Councillor Hills and I were championing that. We're championing a bit of what they've come out with today, in fact. And it includes half price for community service card holders and under 25s, and of course total mobility users. But I was just wondering, Mark, that actually serves us a problem, but a good problem to solve, because we're likely to have induced demand for school bus services and tertiary students reaching universities and other places of training in the peak, where we've already got quite significant demand. Do you have any initial thoughts on this and how we need to plan to respond? We've actually got a month and a bit to respond, haven't we?
We've got some of the buses, we don't have the drivers. So yeah, based on the announcement today, so as we understand at the moment, under 13s will be free, under 25s will be 50%, and community service card holders, as you said, will be 50%. Everybody else reverts back to their normal pre-50% discount from the 1st of July. We have started modelling, particularly around the under 13 free, because obviously that will increase demand, we hope, on our school services and other services. So we have started that. We don't have an answer yet. I'm expecting to have to put more buses and more resources into the school bus area and to those routes that carry a large school children load. But we don't have that answer yet. It may be that in the short term, and to take advantage of this, we do have to shift resources around, as we have done previously on the network up until March, to match demand to resource and capacity levels. But we've certainly started that work. While we understand it's 1 July that the funding is available, and we are already looking at whether we can implement the technical solution by 1 July. We do need to confirm whether it is 1 July or slightly later, based on our HOP card configurations, which we will need to change, as will obviously other regional councils will need to change their ticketing systems and to take advantage of the funding availability from 1 July as soon as possible. So we're already thinking about all that. And we're also looking at our previous fare policy and what haven't we implemented for various reasons over the last few years. For example, a weekly fare cap, which was a key product which we couldn't implement 2 or 3 years ago. And can we implement that as well at the same time to push public transport growth?
That's terrific. Just one last one there is, do we have any optics on whether the under 13s going fare free, is that with a HOP card or without? Because without, we don't have data.
We will be insisting it's with a HOP card. Otherwise, like you say, we don't have the data, and we can't. Well, actually, we need that data to recover the funding from government anyway. So I'm assuming it is absolutely with a zero price ticket or fare.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Darby. Councillor Walker?
Yeah, just an intelligence question first. I'm not familiar with the government announcement, but does the fare deals, do they cover off ferries as well? Okay, in which case, my question then
sorry, let me just, it certainly covers off contracted services. I don't know whether it covers off commercial services such as waging.
Okay, so I really just want to alert you to an ongoing concern about ferry services, particularly the Gulf Harbour line. I'd make the suggestion in terms of communication that Auckland Transport post on the Gulf Harbour ferry page on an ongoing basis, because there continue to be instances where people arrive, they think there's going to be a ferry and there's no ferry, and anyway, it just goes on and on. The other question I've got just goes to the recent flood events, where in some instances there were cars that were parked in the network that were written off from flooding. So I would just hope that we are accumulating that information so that we know, because at some point in the future we may have to have a sign up saying don't park here if there's a heavy rainfall event, because your car might get written off. So just general intelligence that's required. And really the last comment that I'd make, Mr. Chair, is we have experienced at a couple of locations the park and ride at Silverdale, the park and ride at Otiha, some antisocial behaviour, and it's on the part of youth. So I'm just really alerting you, these fair deals are going to encourage more youth. Associated with that, there may well be more problems. So I'm just alerting you to that so that you've got some active response around that. It will become more difficult for the drivers to say, you know, have you paid or not, because they won't even have to pay anymore. Okay, so that's enough.
Okay, so thanks, and I think we will have an item coming on that very issue to the next TIC committee. Okay, thank you, Councillor Walker. Just two to go. Councillor Hills and Councillor Baker.
Thanks, Chair. This is just an idea, and maybe notice a motion or something, working with Councillor Watson if he supports it. But I remember the fare free weekends that we pushed forward was about $600,000 for the weekends. Obviously, we're suddenly going to not have to pay for up to 13s on the weekends. Is there any way to, before the 1st of July, quickly look at what it would cost to fund so it's going to be free for up to 16s in the weekends, and then the government policy is up to 13s. I'd like some advice soon if we can look at if we made a policy that would make it free for under 16s all week. It kind of makes sense, and I'm not sure if the 600,000 would cover it, but it's probably a policy that would standardise that and make a greater difference. So that's just on the table if that could be looked at. And the other one, thanks Mark for the calls back and forth about Fullers and the NX1s. What date did you say the NX1, those 18 drivers would be in and probably rolling out on the busway?
They're progressively joining the depot, as I understand it, over the next 2 weeks. And some are already trained, some will need to be trained, but I can come back to you with some dates on reinstatement or better reliability of the service.
Thank you. And the last question, just could you give a brief couple points on the ferry issues that the improvements coming through that you've sent us through, and what's been planned around the CCTV, the working together, that obviously was a safety issue on Tuesday that caused absolute mess in the Devonport route, but there are some positive things come through.
Sure, through the chair. So I think it was February or March we presented a ferry improvement programme, and we have made some significant progress against that in rolling out some initiatives. There's still quite a bit to do. For example, this week we have agreed with Fuller's that there will be a 2-hour default notification for cancelled services to us that aren't pre-cancelled, so that at least we can get comms out in advance. At the moment, operators tend to try and do their best, which is a good thing from a customer service point of view, to reinstate the service if they know it's going to be cancelled, but they go right up to the last minute, which causes communications issues. So we've agreed a process around that to improve that. In addition, we are supporting Fuller's to co-locate their their customer experience team, who basically manage their operations, and their customer liaison team, who manage communications, including to us, into the ferry building with better access to our CCTV and PA announcements. So that should improve coordination across the full services as well. So that's just 2 examples of improvements that are currently being implemented.
Thank you. And any word on the numbers of crew coming from overseas now that we secured that immigration change? And when is the first boat likely to come off of those low emissions once we fund it? Do you know the date for that yet? Those are my last 2 questions.
I don't have an update, and we can come back to you on the timing around 35 crew, given that the immigration settings were only announced or improved last week. In terms of low emission vessels, we are funding for 7 overall new construction vessels. 4 are currently in construction, so 2 with Macmillan and Wing, which are full electric vessels. They are due to go into trial towards the end of next year, I believe. As Mark mentioned, we've just signed the second of 2 contracts with Key West, is it? Key West for 2 new hybrid vessels as well. So there's 4 under construction out of 7 new vessels.
Right, so thanks, Mark. And Councillor Baker finishes off.
So thanks, Stacey. So just spurred on by the comments from Councillor Henderson and the Mayor, in terms of DSI and the contributing factors, do we drill down? All of those they're all decision making by drivers, every single one of them. Do we drill down into things like not wearing a seatbelt, which I'm still stunned by the number of people who don't wear a seatbelt. So do we drill down into that, and then do we tailor our road safety education messages into, if we've got an issue that we say in Henderson they're just not wearing their seatbelts and people are dying, and I just say that as an example, Shane, or Massey. So do we drill down and use that to tailor our road safety education to address hot points, to try and deal with that, or do we leave it to reducing speed limits and leave it to NZTA and their campaigns?
Through the chair, and thank you for your question. Yes, we do have quite a lot of detail, and so historically you would have just seen that high level number in terms of SOI, but we're getting obviously a lot better, and more recently presenting a lot more sort of data insights to everybody so that you can really understand. So in terms of that targeted engagement, in terms of that, yes, we need to do more of. So are we doing it what I would call concisely right now based on that? No, I don't think we do in terms of that. But if you want a quick rundown, I do have the causal factors right here, and it might be really surprising in terms of that. So, and I do suggest these are causal factors. There might be multiple causal factors involved with any given incident. But in terms of that, there is, in terms of unprotected hazards, is 29%. So that may be, side power poles and things like that on the road corridor in terms of that. No primary treatment when it's an urban fatality is at 80%. In other words, there are no road safety mitigations in the particular area, so that's obviously really high. And when you look at, in terms of alcohol suspected, 71%. In terms of no use of restraints, so not wearing a seatbelt, that's 50%, which is horrendous when you think about it in this day and age. And that's gone up in recent years, so I must stress that point. Learner licence, 29%, restricted licence, 14%, average vehicle star rating, 3.8, no warrant of fitness, 29%. And yeah, that's a broad summary in terms of some of those factors.
Suspected drug use, do you have a?
Yes. In terms of drugs suspected, it's actually at 0. That's only for the 12-month window, yeah.
All right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for that presentation. Certainly, Stacey, I think that's you're detecting a real interest in the committee drilling down in some of that detail. Certainly, particularly in respect, is just one example of the motorcycle deaths and serious injuries, which has been a feature of New Zealand society for decades, but it seems to be getting worse because we have proportionately a lot less motorcyclists than we used to have in the 70s and 80s. So I certainly think we're keen to find out of that, that kind of scandalous figure of 21% of that. So thanks very much, folk. That was a very helpful presentation today. It's been moved by Councillors Baker and Filipina. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thanks very much. And the last is just an information item moved by Councillor Simpson, seconded by Councillor Foley. No questions? Thank you. All those in favour? Against? Against the odds, we have made it before 4 o'clock. Heroic. Thank you, Duncan and team. Sam, Sonia. Thank you. And Barry.